My name is Judy, and I am 32 years old. For almost 8 years now, my relationship with my parents has been strained, like an old, worn-out blanket on the verge of tearing apart. It's not just coldness or formal detachment, it's a deep rift that has divided us for years. And now, unexpectedly, they are trying to re-enter my life. I don't know how to feel about it, nor do I know how to handle the flood of emotions. At moments like these, it seems I desperately need an outsider's perspective to discern where their mistakes end and mine begin. To make sense of the present, I have to revisit my past. My childhood was spent in a small town in Ohio, a quiet place where everyone knows each other and time seems to stand still. I was the eldest daughter in the family, but that afforded me no privileges. When I was 2 years old, my sister Charlotte was born. From the very beginning, she was the golden child. Charming, vibrant, always the center of attention, she had a way of drawing everyone to her with just her presence. Charlotte grew up sociable, active, engaging in sports and easily making friends. In contrast, I was quiet, introverted, and found solace in books and academics. My parents, especially my father, always favored Charlotte. My father, once a high school football star, never seemed to let go of his glory days. He would spend hours teaching Charlotte how to throw the perfect spiral pass in our backyard. They laughed, joking about their shared victories, while I sat on the porch, lost in the worlds I discovered in books. My mother wasn't as overtly biased, but her actions spoke louder than words. The fridge was always adorned with Charlotte's drawings and awards for athletic achievements. My report cards, filled with perfect grades, earned only a restrained, "Good job, Judy." One incident stands out in particular from when I was 10. I won first prize at a science fair. My project was on renewable energy sources. I poured my heart into it, meticulously planning every detail, eager to share my achievement with my parents. But they were too busy celebrating Charlotte's acceptance into the football team. My accomplishment went unnoticed. The science fair remains a memorable event for me, but not the joyful milestone it could have been had my parents been present. When we entered high school, things got even worse. I buried myself in studies and math clubs, dreaming of getting into a prestigious university. My goal was to become a doctor. Charlotte, on the other hand, thrived in her effortless charm. Her athletic achievements, striking looks, and natural magnetism made her a local celebrity. She dated the quarterback, attended parties, and seemed to live a never-ending celebration. I vividly recall seeing her on the cover of the school newspaper one day. She was smiling, surrounded by her team, and I read the article about her accomplishments, feeling invisible once again. Graduation night was the culmination of this invisibility. I had spent weeks preparing my valedictorian speech. When I stepped onto the stage, my eyes scanned the crowd for my family. My father was there, but his attention was fixed on photographing Charlotte. My mother seemed slightly more attentive but was still more engrossed in my sister. After the speech, I stood alone for a long time, watching Charlotte laugh with her friends, her dress sparkling under the lights, as if affirming who the real star of the night was. When I finally got into university, my joy was tinged with bitterness. The acceptance letter felt like a small victory, but it quickly lost its luster. My parents told me they couldn't support me financially. Their savings, as it turned out, had been depleted by unexpected expenses. I later learned that part of that money had gone to Charlotte's training camps and travel. It was the first time I felt that my dreams weren't just ignored but outright sacrificed for her success. I grew accustomed to the shadow I lived in, but it always weighed heavily on me. Perhaps that's why I've kept my distance from my parents for the past 8 years. Now, as they attempt to reconnect, I don't know what to do. Every time they call or write, memories of the past resurface. I fear that these wounds, which I've tried to heal, will reopen once more. I sat at the table, watching my parents enter the cafe, their figures appearing strangely fragile to me. My mother was the first to notice me and froze slightly, as if debating whether to approach. My father, on the other hand, stepped forward, his movements abrupt but hesitant. This was the man whose confidence and strength once filled me with awe. But now everything had changed. They looked weary, as if the years had stripped them not only of their youth but also their self-assurance. As they drew closer, I rose to greet them. We exchanged brief nods, like strangers brought together by chance. They settled into the chairs across from me, and for a moment, silence hung between us, thick with awkwardness and memories too loud to ignore. "You look well, Judy," my mother said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her gaze was tense, almost pleading. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." My father nodded but said nothing. His hands were clasped on the table, his eyes fixed somewhere to the side, as though he couldn't bear to meet my gaze. My own eyes drifted over their faces, noting every detail that spoke of the time since we'd last seen each other. My mother's gray hair, the lines around her mouth. My father's thinning hair, his slumped shoulders. "Why did you want to meet?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, though inside I was roiling. I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear their words. My mother took a deep breath and met my eyes. Her gaze was heavy with sadness, carrying pain that didn't belong to me. "Judy," she began, "we know we've made a lot of mistakes. We want to apologize. And we want to try to make things right." Her voice wavered, and I saw her hands clasped tightly together, as if she were trying to steady herself. My father finally looked at me too. "We're proud of you," he said in a hoarse voice. "Of everything you've achieved. We know we weren't fair, that," he paused, as if searching for the right words, "that we didn't support you the way we should have. And we're sorry for that." Those words made my heart ache. Everything I'd once longed to hear was spoken right in front of me. But instead of relief, I felt a dull pain. I lowered my gaze, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. I needed more time to understand if I could believe them. "And what about Charlotte?" I asked without looking up. It was the question that had burned in me ever since I learned of their attempt to reconnect. My mother and father exchanged quick glances. "She's still living with us," my mother admitted. She's trying to get back on her feet. We're hoping things will improve." The words felt painfully familiar. I'd heard them so many times before, their hope for Charlotte, her successes, her future. They had always pinned their hopes on her, even at the cost of my happiness. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the bitter remarks threatening to escape. "Judy," my mother began again, her voice trembling once more, "we'd like to meet Nicole. She's our granddaughter, and, please, we want to be a part of her life." My daughter's name echoed through the cafe like an alarm bell. My Nicole, my joy, my present. Could I let them into her world when everything they had done in the past had left such deep scars in me? Silence fell over our table again. I stared out the window, feeling a quiet anger building inside me. It was my turn to speak, and I lifted my eyes, studying their faces. Did I want to give them a chance? Or was this just another act in their theater, where I would once again play a secondary role? My mother gazed at me through tears, her hands trembling as if she was barely restraining herself from reaching out to embrace me. My father sat slouched, his eyes drifting between the table and the void, as though he didn't know how to react to my words. The silence enveloping us was heavy, as if each truth spoken aloud hung in the air, adding another layer to our years of distrust. "We understand, Judy," my mother whispered, barely managing to keep her voice steady. "You deserve more than what we gave you. We want to try to make things right, even just a little." I looked at her closely, searching her face for any sign of sincerity. She seemed earnest, but the memories of the past made it hard for me to fully believe her. I had seen too many times how their words didn't match their actions. "I believe you want to make things right," I began slowly, trying to speak firmly. But apologies alone aren't enough. You want to be part of my life, but my life now isn't just about me. It's about my family, Ben and Nicole. If you truly want to change things, you'll need to prove it through actions, not just words. My father finally raised his eyes, which were filled with exhaustion and something else, bitterness or regret, I couldn't quite tell. We don't want to intrude on your life, he began, choosing his words carefully. We know that. We lost you for a long time. But you're our daughter, Judy. And Nicole is our granddaughter. We just want to know her, to see her grow up. Those words made me tense again. I recalled everything they had done for Charlotte and how easily they had overlooked me. And now they wanted to know my daughter. It felt like the same script playing out again, only with new actors. I understand your wishes, I said, striving to keep my tone calm. But I need to be sure this won't happen again. Nicole deserves stability, love, and respect. And I won't allow her to feel the way I did as a child. My mother lowered her eyes, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the edge of a napkin. I knew my words were hurting them, but it was necessary for me. I had to set boundaries to protect what mattered most to me. Charlotte, my mother spoke again, her voice barely audible. She's really struggling. We understand how you feel. We don't want to hurt you again. We hope that someday you can forgive us. Forgive you? I repeated, looking directly at her. That's not something that happens overnight. It's a process. You want my forgiveness, but it requires time and effort. And I can't promise it will happen, not right away. I saw her shoulders sag, as though my words had drained her last bit of strength. My father remained silent, but his expression said more than words. He looked as though he understood all he had lost but had no idea how to reconcile it. Let's start small, I continued. We can talk on the phone from time to time. But for now, I'm not ready for in-person meetings or for you to meet Nicole. That will take more time. I hope you understand. My mother nodded, wiping away the tears that had spilled down her cheeks. My father nodded as well, though his face remained tense. Thank you, Judy, she said. We're willing to wait as long as it takes. We just want to have a chance to be part of your life, even in some small way. I didn't respond. I simply looked at them, trying to process everything that had happened. Inside, I was torn by conflicting emotions. I knew the conversation was an important step, but doubt still lingered. Could I trust them? Could they truly change? We said our goodbyes at the cafe entrance. My father gave me a small pat on the shoulder, and my mother hesitated, wanting to hug me, but held back when she saw my tension. I watched them leave, their figures blending into the crowd, and felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. This was only the first step on a long journey, and I had no idea where it would lead us. When I received the letter, I stared at my phone screen for a long time, unable to believe what I was reading. Charlotte's words seemed carefully chosen to elicit sympathy, but behind her apologies lay something familiar, her usual manipulation. She expressed regret about the past, reminisced about our childhood squabbles, and even admitted her guilt for the times she had taken a privileged position in our family. But the final lines of her letter nullified everything. She was asking for money. Her brilliant idea of selling hot dogs from a food truck sounded so absurd that I couldn't help but smirk. It was a typical Charlotte move, minimal planning, maximum recklessness. Her request for financial support stirred both anger and bitterness in me. It seemed as though all these years had changed nothing. She still saw me not as a sister but as a source of financial aid. Noticing how tightly I was gripping my phone, Ben came over and sat beside me. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowing slightly. I handed him the phone so he could read the letter himself. He scanned the text, then looked at me. "Are you going to respond?" he asked cautiously. "I don't know," I admitted, emotions swirling inside me. Part of me just wants to ignore her. But another part, I paused, searching for the right words. I'm so tired of her manipulations. Tired of her using me, our parents, everyone around her. Ben placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, his touch warm and grounding. You don't owe her anything, he said. Her problems are hers to solve. But if you want to say something, say it. You deserve to be heard. His words helped me gain clarity. I opened my laptop and began typing my response. My letter was direct and honest, yet measured. I wrote that I appreciated her apology but couldn't financially support her latest venture. I reminded her that all her previous, brilliant ideas had ended in failures that others had to clean up. I also made it clear that her constant requests for help undermined any attempts to rebuild our relationship. Once I finished, I reread the letter several times to ensure it conveyed my feelings accurately. Then I hit send and leaned back in my chair. My emotions still churned with anger, but I felt that I had done the right thing. The next day, on my way home from work, I received a short reply from Charlotte, understood. Sorry for bothering you. Her words felt cold, as if she wasn't just disappointed in my refusal but in the very effort to reconnect. It was predictable, yet still unpleasant. That evening, I told Ben about it, and he supported me, reminding me that I wasn't responsible for her mistakes. We sat in the kitchen for a long time, discussing how her behavior had always affected our family. Ben suggested that I focus on myself and my family, keeping the past from interfering with my present. His advice made sense, but putting it into practice was harder than I imagined. The next day, my mother called. Her voice was tense, and I knew immediately that she had heard about my letter. She started by saying that Charlotte was very upset and that she really needed help, but her cautious tone betrayed her doubts. Judy, maybe you could reconsider, she said after a long pause. She's your sister, after all. Mom, I interrupted, trying to remain calm. Do you understand that if I help her now, it will never end? She'll start relying on me again instead of taking responsibility for her life. My mother fell silent, and I heard her let out a heavy sigh. You're probably right, she finally said. It's so hard. We all want her to change, but it seems impossible now. I didn't know how to respond. Charlotte was an adult, but her inability to take responsibility for her actions dragged not only her but all of us down. I said goodbye to my mother, feeling both guilty and relieved. In the days that followed, I decided that the only way to maintain my peace was to focus on my life and my family. That didn't mean I completely cut off my parents or Charlotte, but I established clear boundaries. My health, happiness, and Nicole's well-being became my absolute priorities. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this story with Charlotte wasn't over. After a tense month filled with emotional upheavals, I realized I needed time to recover. The reconciliation that once seemed achievable now felt like a distant dream. One evening, I sat in the living room after work, watching Nicole build a castle with her blocks. Her laughter, bright and genuine, broke through my thoughts like a ray of sunlight piercing the morning fog. Mommy, look, she exclaimed, showing me her creation. Her eyes sparkled with joy, and I couldn't help but smile. That's an amazing castle, Nicole, I said, trying to infuse my words with all the warmth I could muster. Her happiness was becoming more and more precious to me, something I was determined to protect no matter what. The next day, I decided to distract myself from my memories and focus on the present. My work at the hospital had always been a refuge for me, a place where I felt needed. The patients, my colleagues, the daily challenges, they all helped me stay grounded. As I left work, I remembered to pick up a cake for Nicole. Her 3rd birthday had just passed, but Ben and I had decided to celebrate it again with a small family evening. When I got home, Ben had already decorated the kitchen with balloons. He was always thoughtful and knew how to lift my spirits. We spent the evening with Nicole, surrounded by laughter and joy. These moments became my anchor, keeping me firmly in the present. But even during these joyful days, the shadow of the past didn't completely disappear. A few days later, I found a letter from my mother in the mailbox. It was unexpected, as we hadn't communicated recently. I stared at the envelope for a long time, hesitating to open it. Finally, curiosity got the better of me, and I tore it open. In the letter, my mother wrote that she was sorry. There were no requests or excuses, just sincere regret and a desire to make things right. She acknowledged what had gone wrong and admitted that she and my father needed time to rethink their actions. Strangely, the letter didn't make me angry. Instead, I felt an odd mixture of relief and unease. Ben noticed my mood and asked, "Do you want to respond?" I thought about it but decided it was too soon. My heart wasn't ready for the next step yet. "I think I need more time," I replied. "I want to believe they're sincere, but I'm afraid of being wrong again." Ben nodded, understanding without further explanation. His support was invaluable to me. He reminded me that I had every right to set my own rules and boundaries. That evening, I was putting Nicole to bed again. She asked me to read her one more book, and I chose The Little Prince. As I read the lines about the importance of taming someone, I couldn't help but think about my family. We were all bound by this invisible thread, but it felt stretched too thin, as though it might snap at any moment. A few more weeks passed, and I focused on work and family. Nicole delighted us daily with her discoveries, and Ben continued to be my source of strength. We began planning a small vacation to break away from our routine. I wanted to show Nicole the ocean, to hear her joyful laughter as the waves touched her feet. But one evening, I received another letter, this time from Charlotte. It was shorter than the last and had a very different tone. She wrote that she understood how much she had damaged our relationship but wanted to try to repair it. This time, there were no requests for money or assistance. Charlotte admitted to feeling lost and lonely. I set the letter aside, unsure what to think. Was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation or another manipulation? I didn't want to make a hasty decision, but I felt like there was no room left to retreat. The situation remained complicated and tangled, but I realized one thing: I couldn't let the past control my present. All I could do was keep moving forward, step by step, carefully guarding what was most important to me. 6 months passed, but I still occasionally thought back to the day I received the letter from my father. It was a turning point, one that changed my perspective on the past and allowed me to see that even the deepest fractures in relationships could begin to heal with genuine effort. His handwriting, long forgotten, transported me back to my childhood, when he used to write me notes reminding me to remember to smile or wishing me luck on a test. The letter was simple yet poignant. It didn't seek forgiveness, it apologized, and there was a profound difference. My father wrote that he had spent a long time reflecting on our relationship. He acknowledged his mistakes, his blindness, and his inability to understand me when I needed his support the most. He explained that his focus on Charlotte wasn't so much preference as it was an attempt to fill the void of his own unrealized dreams. I couldn't help but appreciate his honesty. He even admitted that he had spent years hiding his shame for how unfairly he had treated me. I wrestled with whether to respond. Leaving the letter unanswered would mean continuing the carefully maintained distance I had built. But something in its tone made me feel that this step from my father was more than just a gesture. It was something beyond words, a desire to make amends, not merely mask the wounds. A few weeks later, I wrote back. My letter wasn't long, but I tried to express my gratitude for his candor and his effort to reach out. I also noted that I wasn't ready for full reconciliation yet, but was open to starting small. His reply was brief but warm. He thanked me for the opportunity to talk and assured me he would respect my boundaries. From then on, our conversations became more frequent, though cautious. My father asked about my work and Nicole's milestones, His questions felt genuine, not just obligatory. He even shared stories about his days, missed opportunities, and how he felt he had come to value family too late. As Nicole's birthday approached, my father unexpectedly asked what he could give her as a gift. This gesture showed how much he had changed. In the past, he would have simply bought something he liked, without considering what mattered to her. I suggested something symbolic and proposed spending the day together, even if only via video call. Nicole's birthday turned out to be special. When she opened a box containing a toy doctor set, her eyes lit up. It was a gift with a double meaning. It echoed my profession and, perhaps, was my father's acknowledgement that my achievements mattered too. In that moment, I saw his face light up with joy. It was a side of him I had never seen before, fully present, attentive, laughing as Nicole tried to take his blood pressure with the toy set through the screen. That day marked a new chapter for me. For the first time, I felt that something new could begin within our family. Although I remained cautious, I wanted to believe that the changes were real. After the celebration, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was one of the warmest days I'd experienced in years. Sitting on the couch with Ben, reflecting on the day, he wrapped his arms around me, and I felt like I was finally beginning to let go of the weight I had carried for so long. My father continued to write to me, but now his letters weren't just about the past. He shared glimpses of his present, describing how he had taken up woodworking to cope with his inner struggles. He even offered to make something for Nicole by hand one day. I wasn't sure if she would agree, but I was touched by his desire to be part of her life. Over time, my mother also began to join our conversations, though they were still infrequent. She called to ask how my day went, what Nicole ate for breakfast, and even suggested visiting us, though I wasn't ready for that yet. However, her attempts were more restrained, and I could feel that she was trying not to push me. I understood that change doesn't happen overnight, but I could see that my father was genuinely working on himself. This process was challenging for both of us. But this time, I was willing to try. A few more months passed, and I felt like life was starting to regain a sense of balance. My relationship with my parents had become less tense, while the distance with Charlotte remained, a distance that perhaps both of us needed. Every step forward was hard one, but each brought its own kind of satisfaction. My mother continued to stay in touch through emails, sometimes sending recipes from my childhood accompanied by heartfelt comments like, "Do you remember when we made this for Christmas? You were 6 and insisted you could mix the dough all by yourself." These little moments, insignificant at first glance, became a kind of bridge between the past and the present. They reminded me that even in our complicated family history, there were bright moments. Charlotte, according to my father, had made significant progress in her recovery. He proudly shared that she hadn't missed a single Gamblers Anonymous meeting in months and had even managed to pay off some of the debts she'd accumulated over the years of her addiction. This was the Charlotte I had forgotten, determined, ready to make amends. She hadn't reached out to me yet, and I was grateful for the pause. Perhaps she needed time to find her own answers before seeking reconciliation. My father continued writing me letters, and I noticed they were becoming more personal. He shared reflections on how he'd treated me during my childhood, acknowledging how much he had missed. In one letter, he mentioned how proud he'd been when he learned I had earned a scholarship to college, but he hadn't known how to express it at the time. These admissions, though long overdue, became an important step in understanding him as a person. One evening, I was sitting in the kitchen responding to one of his letters when Ben came over and wrapped his arms around my shoulders. "How are your written conversations going?" he asked with a soft smile. "Not bad," I replied, turning to him. "It feels like we're starting to find common ground." "It's strange but nice." Ben nodded, his eyes full of understanding. "I'm glad for you. It's important, you know. Even if things aren't perfect, the effort is worth it." Those words resonated with me. Things might never be perfect, but something inside me told me I was moving in the right direction. Last week, We went on a family picnic to the park. Ben played with Nicole on the swings while I sat on a blanket, enjoying the warm autumn sun. These peaceful moments, filled with my daughter's laughter and the joy of her father, had become my anchor. I no longer let the past overshadow the present. When Nicole ran up to me holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, I felt a wave of warmth spread through me. She handed me the flowers with a beaming smile and said, "Mommy, these are for you." I hugged her, and in that moment, I realized that my role as a mother was a chance to give Nicole what I had once lacked: unconditional love, support, and a sense of safety. Every day, I strive to instill those values in her. Recently, my father called and suggested meeting in person. He wanted to visit and spend time with Nicole, but I wasn't ready for that step yet. We agreed to keep it to another video call, taking things slowly. I shared this with Ben, and he supported me, reminding me that I had the right to move at my own pace. During the video call, my father surprised me again. He gifted Nicole a book with illustrations he had drawn himself. It was a story about a little girl who nurtured a tree, caring for it and shielding it from the wind. Nicole was thrilled, and I struggled to hold back tears. The gesture spoke louder than any words ever could. I began to understand that forgiveness is a process, not an instant decision. It requires time, effort, and mutual willingness to understand. My family and I were walking that path slowly but steadily. My past no longer controlled my present. Instead, I was learning to accept it and find balance between where I'd been and where I was going. Every day, I remind myself that my happiness is something I create. Nicole, Ben, and the moments of peace I find in their company, that's my reality. And as I continue to move forward, I hold on to a cautious optimism that my family, too, can find a way to heal.